Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Breaking Muscle Radio. I'm your host, Becca Borawski, Jenkins, and our co-host is here with us as well. Say hello and introduce yourself, Chet.
Hey, it's Chet Morjaria here.
All right. So for our very first episode, we thought it would make sense to talk with one of our very first writers, Valerie Worthington. So for those of you who don't know Valerie, here's the deal. Val is the only BJJ black belt I know who also has a PhD. So needless to say, a black belt in educational psychology makes for a unique perspective. If you've read any of Val's articles on our site, of which there are quite a number, then you've seen how she applies her learning theory to BJJ, life, self-realization, and things like pork roll and karaoke. So without further delay, let's say hello to Valerie.
Well, hello. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Val.
Very good to have you here today, Val.
Great to be here. Thanks again so much for the invitation.
So let's just start kind of with the central theme to everything you've got going on in your life, which is Brazilian Jiu-jitsu. So can you tell us when you first got into Jiu-jitsu and why it was the thing that stuck for you versus other sports you've done?
I can certainly give it a try. I think that's the second question is the one that I'll probably spend the rest of my life answering. But I got involved in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the late 80s when I was in graduate school. I had become fairly sedentary because I wasn't very good at being in graduate school, so I let it take up most of my time. And once I got a handle on that, I realized that it was important for me to strike a balance between a life of the mind and being a little bit more physical. I'd always done sports and things in high school and college. And so I started out with running, and I ran a couple of marathons. And I liked having something to work toward. I liked having a goal to work toward, but I tired of running pretty quickly. And then I decided that a martial art would probably keep my interest for a longer time because there was more to learn. People spend their lives trying to understand and pursue a martial art. So I went with Muay Thai and liked kicking and punching things, but the really bad joke that I make is that I didn't like so much getting kicked and punched. So the place that I did, yeah. So the place that I did Muay Thai also had Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and those of you in the know, will know that some of the drills and the warm-up exercises can look pretty crazy. And so when I saw the crazy things that those people were doing, I thought, I have to give that a try. So I did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and quickly left Muay Thai in the dust. And I think one of the main reasons that Jiu-Jitsu has been so much a persistent part of my life is because there's always something new to learn. And another reason is that it's unlike anything I've ever tried before. So there's always more that I need to ask of myself, and the context is completely different from any that I'd ever experienced prior to that. Although now, of course, a Jiu-Jitsu Academy is pretty familiar to me. So I think it's just endlessly fascinating, both in terms of what you can learn technically, but also in terms of what, if you're willing, you can learn about yourself.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you said you sought out, you found Jiu-Jitsu because you were looking for a balance of the life of the mind and the physical body, and yet that's also a struggle within Jiu-Jitsu itself, too, no?
This is true, and I as soon as I said that, I realized that Jiu-Jitsu for me, and I think for a lot of people, is it's very brain taxing as well. It hurts your brain as much as it can make your body sore. And again, I think for me, it was, at least at first, it was because I had never asked my body to do any of the things I was asking it to do for Jiu-Jitsu. And then subsequent to that, as my lifestyle started to change, I realized that I was making more and more choices that would allow me to train. And those choices were more and more off of what I would have considered to be my beaten path or the path that I would have expected for myself. And that causes all kinds of identity crises and questions about what I really believe and who I am and all those wonderful things. So I would agree with you 100% that there's a big cognitive, psychological, emotional component to jiu-jitsu for me. I suspect for other people as well, but I certainly can't speak for anyone but myself.
Now let's talk about that a little bit, because now in your finding the balance both within and without jiu-jitsu, like you went through a whole career change. So when you first got into jiu-jitsu, you came from a much more kind of corporate situation, and I know you used to blog and talk about getting off the grid and going on your walkabout. Can you explain for people who don't know that, kind of what that period was for you?
Sure. In 2006, I was living in Chicago, and I think I was on my second job out of graduate school. And as you say, it was a more corporate environment, 9-to-5 gig, nice clothes, all that stuff. And I was really unhappy. And I think I had a moment where I looked around and had acquired all of the trappings of the life that I thought I was supposed to want. But I got those things and looked around and realized that they weren't the things that I wanted. So what jiu-jitsu did for me, or to me, depending on how you think about it, is I would go to a job that was sort of gray, and then I would come out of the job and I'd go to jiu-jitsu, and then all of a sudden my life would be in Technicolor for about 2 or 3 hours while I was training. And then I'd come out of jiu-jitsu, and then my life would go back to gray. So jiu-jitsu was almost subversive in that it showed me how happy it was possible for me to be, and it also highlighted how unhappy I was in other aspects of my life. So eventually it got to be, I would say, unbearable, and I did the drastic thing. For me, what was a very drastic thing, which was to quit the job and sell the condo that I'd been living in Chicago, and I used the money from the sale of my home to buy a car and to drive and to put my things in storage, and then I drove around the country on a jiu-jitsu tour. So I started in Chicago and went west and probably visited maybe 50 different academies and had amazing experiences and met wonderful people and tried to figure out who I was. And I'm still working on that part. But
aren't we all? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're all in it together. But what that really did, again, for me and to me was give me the opportunity to think about what was important to me and how I wanted to live my life according to the things that I valued. And it's not that the things that I valued turned out to be that much different from the things that I thought I valued. It's just that I come at them from a different orientation now, and I have a lot more self-awareness about the choices that I make. So if I make a choice and it turns out not to be such a good choice, then I don't have nearly as much fear about changing my mind or making still another choice to modify that first choice. And it was because I loved jiu-jitsu so much and didn't really love much else in my life that I was almost forced to go toward the Technicolor, and that's what, again, jiu-jitsu did to and for me.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. If that's where you feel most alive, that's what you're gonna, seek out. Now, I know there's probably a lot of people who hear what you're saying about the gray versus the Technicolor, and they're like, "Wow, my life is really gray, but I can't do what she did. I can't sell everything and take off. I've got family, I've got whatever." What are your thoughts on how those people, how can they explore jiu-jitsu? How can they find some of these answers in a way that's not as drastic?
I think that's a fantastic question. And the first thing is to be willing at least to put yourself outside of your comfort zone, in my opinion. I certainly don't recommend that everybody do what I did. I also don't know that everybody who might be listening or who might have thought this way is quite as unhappy as I was. So I think there are a couple. I have a couple thoughts about this. So the first thought is, doing this kind of thing for me, doing what I did was the absolute most terrifying thing I've ever done. But it was made up of a bunch of really, really small seeming terrifying things. So you don't need to make a huge, grand, sweeping gesture. You need to make a gesture. And if it's something that clenches your stomach and that you think to yourself, oh, I really don't want to do this, then that's probably the thing you need to do. So, for instance, if you have a full-time job and you have a family and you have a lot of obligations, but man, you really, really want to write, and the thought of even calling yourself a writer is absolutely terrifying to you, let alone going to a meetup or going to a group where you know there are writers. If those are the things that terrify you, then those are the things you need to do, because those are the things that demonstrate or that give you the signal that you're pushing yourself. And if it were easy to do all the things that we want to in our lives, then everybody would be super happy. But there really is something to be said for the status quo because it's familiar. That's certainly how it was for me. So I would say go toward the discomfort. As uncomfortable as it is, it's good for you. The other thing is I think I've written about this book. I'm a big fan of a book that's called Finding Your Own North Star, Choosing the Life You Are Meant to Live. And it's by a life coach named Martha Beck. And I'm a total Martha Beck fangirl, at least in terms of this book, because what I like about it is that, first of all, it's very funny. It's not, it's very accessible, and you get the sense from her, again, that we're kind of all in it together. So when she says, you need to do X, Y, and Z, it's because she's made herself do X, Y, and Z 50 times. And the other thing that I really like about this book is that she gives the reader actual action items. I'm all about action items. So, yeah, I want to change my life, and I want to be happier. Okay, well, what are the 5 things I can do this week to make myself happier? And those are the kinds of things that she helps break down. So those are the 2 things I would say. Make yourself uncomfortable and look up Martha Beck.
Chet, I'm just going to let you go ahead and start. I think you had some really good insights because you mostly know Val through her articles, and therefore you had some really good questions.
Yeah, thanks, Becca. So, yeah, Val, I'm coming from a completely different perspective, and I've been reading up, and I noticed a couple of themes in your writing, actually. So you spoke about the opportunities that BJJ gives you to learn about yourself and to learn about the technical aspects. But something you've written about is the learning from your mistakes. And also something else, another theme that I've spotted in your writing is starting off in BJJ as well. So to kind of pair those 2 together then, just wanted to ask you, which aspects of BJJ do you feel are important for a newbie to get off on the right foot with? And which aspects of the sport do you think it's okay to kind of learn from your mistakes from?
Ooh, good question. I think I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle. And so here's how I'll answer that, and then you can tell me if you like this answer, and if not, then I'll say something else.
Sounds good.
One of the things that was really striking to me when I started jiu-jitsu, and keep in mind, I was going to say I was late in the game, but I think it just depends on who you ask. I was in my late 20s when I started jiu-jitsu. So I was not used to not being particularly good at something. And it wasn't because I had avoided trying new things. It's because I'd lived enough life to demonstrate to myself and to others that according to certain criteria, I was pretty capable. Then jiu-jitsu came along, and all the things that I was good at or had demonstrated that I had some facility with, some ability with, had nothing to do with jiu-jitsu. Nothing. Nobody cares if you're a doctor. Nobody cares if you are in Mensa. What matters when you do jiu-jitsu is how good you are at jiu-jitsu. And so what I would recommend to people who are thinking that they might want to start jiu-jitsu is not only to be open to being bad at things, but to embrace it. Because there's something actually really freeing, particularly when you have responsibilities in your life, about being really bad at something and having nobody expect anything other than that from you. And of course, in my case, it was an ego thing, and I'm sure that if you've read some of my stuff, you've seen that I will quote the old saw, which is "Leave your ego at the door." But in order to get better at life, we need to be willing to set our egos aside and learn. And this is actually a beautiful opportunity to do that, precisely because not much is expected of us when we're starting out. So it could require a shift in attitude, and I think I've written an article about this, about how we really do in some ways become a different person if we're successful in other areas and then we step on the mat with a white belt tied around our waist. So embrace being that other person, that person who has kind of the world ahead of them, all kinds of things to learn, people who, if we show the right attitude, are eager to help us along the way. And so I think I've sort of conflated your questions, because we're going to have to, if we're new at anything, we're going to have to be okay with not being good at things and with learning from mistakes. I think the key is having as positive an attitude about that as we possibly can, and that, I think, is the challenge. Do you like that response?
Cool. I like that response. Thank you. And I think I know what you're going to answer to this next question, but I'll ask it anyway, because you spoke about action points before, so this is probably a good example. But if you could give one piece of advice then to a new student like me, what would it be?
A new student to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, or kind of similarly, I would suggest writ large that you open yourself up to the process, that you just be open to everything that you're learning. Now, that being said, if that's going to be an okay thing, then it's important for you to have done some research ahead of time to make sure that there's a good fit between you and your needs and the personality and the expectations of the academy that you decide to join. So, assuming that you've done some due diligence, that you've asked around, that you've conducted your research, and you found a place that you feel comfortable is going to see to your safety and your well-being first and foremost, then you can open yourself up to the process, have as positive an attitude as you possibly can, and laugh off as many of the mistakes as you possibly can. And just pay attention and be observant and go regularly and take notes. And I know that I'm giving more than one action item, but I feel like they're all kind of under this umbrella.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, they're all kind of under this umbrella.
The beginner mentality.
Yes, exactly. Enter it with a spirit of excitement and exploration, as opposed to a spirit of fear and anxiety about what everybody else is going to think of you. Because truth be told, for a long time, what people are going to think of you is probably not much. Not in terms of I don't think much of that person, but in terms of I don't think often about that person, because they're going to be doing their own thing. So do your own thing and enjoy doing it.
Cool. I love that. And it's really interesting to me there that you were talking about being open and, laughing and crying and just embracing the emotion as well, because that's something that personally I find really captivating in your writing, in the fact that it comes from such a personal and emotive place. And it makes me think, because as a lifter myself, I find that some lifts are better to approach from an emotive and aggressive mindset, and others are best to approach with more of a calm and considered approach. I guess the difference is between me and you, or my sport and your sport, is that my opponent never changes. It's always a lump of metal. So I'm interested to know how a little bit more about how you feel that emotions play into competitive BJJ as you advance, perhaps from that beginner mentality. You know, when would you say it's okay to show emotion, and when would you say it's okay, or when would you say you need to kind of hide it away?
Yeah, so feeling emotion and showing emotion are two different things, and add to that a third thing, which is being aware of the emotion that you're feeling and what the drivers are for it. And those are really complex. Being self-aware enough to know that I'm frustrated because I can't get this technique to work, as opposed to I'm frustrated because I had a crappy day at work and then I brought that onto the mat, as opposed to I'm frustrated because I haven't had much sleep, et cetera, et cetera. Teasing those kinds of things out is, in my experience, it's important to know kind of where you're coming from and what your needs are, and whether and to what extent you're getting them met. So when I say that it's important to be able to feel your emotions, I don't necessarily mean that it's important to express them all over the place willy-nilly. And my preference, if at all possible, is to keep things light, or to make sure that I'm focused, depending on the tone of a given class. But the tears and the anger, and believe me, there's plenty of both in my past and probably in my future. But those things I'm going to try to either leave off the mat, or I'm going to try to compartmentalize and table them, or I'm going to try to channel them into what it is that I'm trying to accomplish. So I know that different people have different procedures or rituals that they follow in order to, whether it's to psych themselves up for competition or to prepare for competition, or to even step on the mat. For me, many times it was all I could do to make myself get on the mat because I was so intimidated. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm making a distinction between feeling your emotions and expressing your emotions. And I think that, I'm guessing that people who do what you do, Chet, feel emotions related to their practice, but maybe it's about knowing the drivers, knowing that there's kind of a time and a place for all of them, and learning more about when that is and where that is, and how you can focus that to make sure that you're performing to the best of your ability in the moment.
Yeah, I think we've all
cool.
had that day, no matter what the sport, where you wind up in the locker room or the bathroom crying by yourself, right?
Yes.
So I'm curious, because I know, obviously, and we'll talk about it more in a little bit, you've done a lot as far as women being involved in jiu-jitsu, but I know when you started, there probably were very few women involved. So do you see a difference in the level of emotion either expressed or allowed in co-ed classes versus women's classes?
Oh, that's a good question. I hadn't really thought about that. I think that what can happen more nowadays is that since there are more women, there's still relatively few, but since there are more women, there's more maybe of a support network, and also there may be more modeling of behavior. So two things. First of all, I think that everybody's different. And I'll say that I've seen probably as many emotional outbursts from men on the mat as I have from women, and the ones from men tend to be anger as opposed to tears, although I've seen some tears from men too. And the other thing that is that everyone's different. When you
have a student get emotional when you're teaching, how do you handle that?
In different ways. The first thing that I realize that I have to do is put aside my own defensiveness or my own, WTH is going on here, and really, really try to be in sync with the person who is expressing the emotion at the time. I wrote an article about one student I had who really had a public and large meltdown on the mat. And what I did in that case was just pull him aside. And when I see different people, sometimes you can, I think as a coach, you get to the point where you can sense the energy, kind of like animals know when an earthquake is coming. You can sense either from the look on someone's face or from the way they're talking or from the way they're acting that maybe it's time to pull them aside and have a conversation. And on more than one occasion, I've done that, and we've sort of made it safely to the bathroom or to the side of the mat before the rumbling starts. So that's the thing that I'm going to try to do is, first of all, make sure that I'm understanding that this person needs something from me right now or from someone and that I might be able to provide it. Second of all, I'm going to try to get them to a place where they feel safe expressing what they need to express. And then third of all, we'll try to address what the issue is, and we'll try to identify it first, because sometimes the outburst doesn't really have anything to do with what the underlying issue is, but eventually we'll get to it and then give the person the opportunity to kind of take a couple deep breaths and then go back to class. I think that so it's jiu-jitsu, any physical activity, any activity where you're pushing yourself physically and asking a lot of yourself, asking more of yourself, a little bit more each day than you did the day before, you're gonna be tapping into your physical reserves. You're going to be exhausting yourself, and that's going to mean that your resistance is down when it comes to dealing with these big waves of emotion. So if I'm not afraid of big waves of emotion, and I think that it's important to show a student that it's okay to have them, but that we need to make sure that we handle them in the right way.
So one of the things that, like you're saying, there's a physical evolution and a whole learning curve that happens when someone is an athlete in any discipline, and that's part of where the emotion comes from, is the frustration with all the ups and downs of the learning curves involved. Do you think your background and your understanding of learning theory and the science behind it helps you as an athlete and as a coach?
I think a couple things do. I am the child of two retired psychologists. So when I was growing up, there were a lot of clients coming to my house, and so I learned to speak in a soothing tone and get coffee for people while they were waiting for either my mother or my father for their appointments. And so as a result, I'm not afraid of well, I am afraid of it, but I do it anyway, of looking at my own psyche and kind of poking around in there. And I'm not afraid of what I see when other people are poking around inside theirs. So that has been incredibly helpful. I think it's made me more empathetic. It's made me a better listener. And with the learning theory, absolutely. When I started jiu-jitsu, I saw just so many applications of what I had learned in graduate school, and I'm thrilled to be able to write about them and sort of take ideas and play with them and write them out and see how they sound to me. And there's so much learning that goes on in any athletic endeavor if we allow that to happen. And like we were talking about, it happens on so many different levels. So I would say that my background helps me, but I also know plenty of wonderful, empathetic, intuitive, insightful coaches who don't have the same kinds of life experiences that I do necessarily, but still do amazing work with their athletes and elicit amazing performances and a lot of hard work. Both in terms of the chosen athletic endeavor and also in terms of trying to grow as a person.
So which topics from this sports psychology perspective and this background that you have you found significant and maybe even unexpectedly have impacted your BJJ and your coaching?
One of the big ones, and this I think would come more from conversations that I've had with my parents, is the issue of interpersonal boundaries. a coach can mean so many different things to so many different people, and sometimes we can get ourselves into difficult situations if we don't establish appropriate boundaries. And sometimes those boundaries shift from even with a relationship that I have with one person. Maybe that relationship shifts in some way. But it's important to, as a coach, I believe, to have a sense of what I think is an appropriate interaction, where my coaching begins and ends, and whether there is room for other types of relationships with that person in a way that's going to be safe and ethical for both people. So that was one that was really a surprise to me, was to sort of realize how important it is to have a good sense of what your own boundaries are, and to realize that enforcing them is not mean. It's healthy, and it's an important thing to model for people who might want to follow in your footsteps or do something similar, where they're trying to help other people come along.
So personal boundaries is a interesting aspect to jiu-jitsu, given that it's a really physically close thing. It's emotionally close. It's a really there's not a lot of space between people on a lot of levels in jiu-jitsu, which makes the whole issue of gender relations complicated and interesting and enlightening all at the same time. So one of the things you've written a lot about over the years is being female, training with guys, how this all relates to jiu-jitsu. And I know, over the last couple of years, there's been some unfortunate incidents that have evolved the conversation. Can you tell me how you think things have evolved in the last year or so, and if things are looking more positive, if the communication has helped things?
That's a tough one for me to answer in terms of the entire community. One of the things that I can say is the things that the articles that I've written about those kinds of incidents, the articles that I've written about my personal belief that, it sounds so trite, but if we want to see change happen in the world, what's that quote? Be the change you want to see in the world. And it's so hard to do those things, to police ourselves and be vigilant about our own behavior. But what I have seen is at least a willingness on the part of the people who read my articles to consider what that means, to consider what it means for them to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And it's incredibly painful and difficult to acknowledge things like, I wrote an article once where I sort of came out as a closet sexist sometimes. There are times when I do things on the mat and in general that are probably sexist, and I don't like that about myself. But if I don't shine a light on it, then it won't go away. So I've heard enough from people who've read stories like the ones that focus on those kinds of really tough issues to know that people are thinking about these things, not necessarily only because of what I've written, but because the people who are interested in exploring those kinds of issues really do want to be part of the solution.
Thanks, Val. Let's keep with this sort of wider picture and talk about Groundswell Grappling Concepts, the company that you run, and the parent company of Women's Grappling Camp. Mm-hmm. So I guess along with the landscape, of jiu-jitsu and gender, which has kind of changed over time and evolved over time as well, the idea of the camps and the company itself has perhaps evolved over time. Could you fill us in a little bit about what the original concept and intention you had in mind was?
Sure. The original concept was the brainchild of Elena Hardy, who is a brown belt under Felicia O. And Mark Stables. And so she had come to Felicia and said, you should do a camp for women. So this was back in 2008, I think. And Felicia said, nobody will come. And Elena set it aside, and then she came back and said, you should do a camp for women. And Felicia set it aside and said, nobody will come. And I should mention, Felicia is she's a black belt under Jean-Jacques Machado and had a very storied competition career. So eventually, Felicia said, okay, we'll do this. And she pulled me in, and she pulled in Emily Kwok, who is the first female Canadian black belt. So the three of us ran our first camp in 2009, and we thought, we'll get like 10 people, and we had to cap it at 30. And then we did a couple more camps, and the same thing happened, and we realized that there really was a desire for women to have the opportunity to train with each other, precisely because, particularly back then, most of the women who were training were the only woman at their academy. My thoughts about women's grappling camp and what has subsequently become Groundswell Grappling Concepts, which is now me, Emily Kwok, Hannette Stack, and Lola Newsom, because Elena and Felicia had to step aside for various reasons. My belief about it was that it was never something that was supposed to be exclusionary, not kind of a she-woman man-haters club. It was a place for women to train with each other, but then increasingly to, again, here comes a word, but to feel empowered to make a positive difference in their academies and in their little part of the jiu-jitsu world, male and female. So over time, we realized that we had a message, and we think it's an important one, and that it wasn't a message that was only for women, that men could benefit from it too. And as we did more camps, we heard more rumblings from more men saying, well, when's there going to be a men's camp or a co-ed camp? And we actually did our first co-ed camp earlier this year in May. And it was mind-blowing. It was amazing to have the opportunity to talk sometimes about gender issues, sometimes about issues that everybody faces in jiu-jitsu. But really, we hoped give an opportunity for people to talk about the things that they think about related to jiu-jitsu when they're off the mat, and not just focus on the things that they do in jiu-jitsu when they're on the mat. So what we are realizing is that the message is a good one for everyone, we think at least, and that there's some traction there and some interest there. So we want to continue to meet what we perceive to be the need for this kind of information. So we're working on more offerings, more classes and certifications and resources. And as we progress, we want to, if we can, reach a wider and wider audience. And we hope do good in the jiu-jitsu world and in the world in general.
That's awesome. So pretty much throughout all the phases of your jiu-jitsu life so far, it's really been about that empowerment, about connecting the emotional and the intellectual and the physical all in one place. It just happens to be jiu-jitsu for this group of people.
I think that's a great way of thinking about it. A passion, regardless of what it is, if properly channeled, then a passion can do amazing things for people's lives. And it doesn't have to be jiu-jitsu. It can be weightlifting. It can be writing. It can be boating. Insert name of endeavor here. And there's a desire to learn more about how to do it well. There's a desire to learn more about the culture that surrounds it. And there's a desire to learn more about how to be a positive influence in that world among people who take it seriously and have decided to devote more than just kind of a small amount of time to pursuing it. So I agree with you 100%. I think, and this was another thing that was sort of notable about when I first started writing for Breaking Muscle was some of the people that I heard from the most about stories that I wrote were people who don't train, who have no interest in jiu-jitsu, who don't care about who just won this or who just got promoted to that. They care about what I had to say because what I had to say resonated with them as people.
So to wrap things up, Val, I have I don't know, I'm guessing you're familiar with James Lipton and Inside the Actors Studio. And he always ends with his 10 questions, right? So I thought it'd be kind of fun to ask you. I don't think I have 10, but kind of some shorter questions related to jiu-jitsu. So answer these as quickly or as long as you want. What is your favorite BJJ move?
The head and arm triangle.
What is your least favorite move?
Well, being under someone's side control. That's not really a move, but I really don't like it down there.
What do you love most about jiu-jitsu?
There's something new to learn every day, or there's something old to learn in a different way every day if I allow myself to.
What do you hate most about jiu-jitsu?
That it doesn't love me as nearly as much as I love it.
What's your least favorite thing about strength and conditioning?
The anticipation. This doesn't happen nearly as much anymore, but I can remember knowing that in the morning I would be getting ready to do a squat series and not being able to sleep.
What's your favorite thing about strength and conditioning? Yeah.
My favorite thing about strength and conditioning?
Yeah.
That moment just after a lift or after a set when you weren't sure you were going to be able to do it, and you did it, and then you get to sit down for a second and just have done it.
Nice. What's your favorite cheat meal or food?
Yes.
Nice. All right. I'm stealing this one directly from James Lipton. What profession, other than your current one, would you most like?
Oh, man. Let's see. I think I would like to be a writer, which I'm working on. But if I couldn't be a writer, then I would want to learn how to fix cars.
Oh, that's
Although
awesome.
I would highly recommend that nobody come to me for service.
We'll let you work on that one for a while.
I know.
All right, and last one. What's one piece of advice you would give anyone, BJJ, life advice, one piece of advice that you would hand out?
There's so many people who are so much smarter than I am about these kinds of things, so I'm just going to steal. Okay, so I'll put it this way. This isn't a short way of putting it, but Warren Zevon, who you may have heard of, he was a musician, and he wrote Werewolves of London and Lawyer, Guns and Money. He died in recent years of cancer and was given a diagnosis and was told that he had about a year to live. So he got together a whole bunch of his favorite artists and did all kinds of duets and songs and put together an album that is called Enjoy Every Sandwich. And the rationale for this was you don't know when your number's up, not to be maudlin, but you don't know what's coming down the pike, and it could be a really, really delicious sandwich. And even if it's not such a good sandwich, enjoy it, because it's where you are right now, it's what you've got right now. So enjoy every sandwich.
Right? It's the sandwich you've got today, and that's what you've got.
Exactly.
Nice. Well, thank you very much for being with us today, Val. I really appreciate you taking the time and being our guinea pig for our inaugural show and talking about all this with us.
Oh, you're welcome. And again, thank you so much. I have gotten so much out of having the opportunity to write for Breaking Muscle and of being plugged into this community and just a group of like-minded people who are just trying to be a little bit better every day. So thank you.
And for me as well, Val, thank you very much. And I'm sure after speaking about your camps and giving such an insight as well into how newbies can get started with the sport, there's going to be a whole bunch of people wanting to keep up with what you're doing and learn some more. So are there any websites or projects that you'd like to mention in terms of what you're up to or what you're about to be up to?
Well, we usually do free women's camps per year, one in the summer, and that one's coming up in Princeton, New Jersey at Princeton BJJ in July. And then we usually do a camp in November, and then we usually do a camp in February. And we are also planning on other co-ed events coming up, and we're planning to put together other resources that will be available. And if people have questions, then they can contact us at groundswellgrappling.com. They can contact me at breakingmuscle.com and at my Breaking Muscle address. And so those are the two main things, and we're plugging away and trying to keep it going.
Nice. I have a feeling you will.
Well, thank you.
It's a powerful group of ladies you've got going on there, so it's pretty exciting. Yeah. So that is it for today. So thank you, Val, once again for being here. Thank you to Chet for being here with me also. And for all of you out there listening, thank you from Breaking Muscle Radio. Thanks for joining us on our inaugural episode, and we hope to have you back for many more to come.